So Ty Cobb is a former assistant U.S. attorney for the District of Maryland who served on the Trump administration legal team overseeing their response to the Mueller investigation. But he resigned after less than a year and has been an outspoken Trump critic ever since. Ty joins me now. Ty, great to see you again. As you know, Trump... the former president has had trouble holding on to qualified lawyers. We have watched that case by case, but this time around, Team Trump seems to be pretty solid. What do you think makes this dynamic so different this time around, or is it too early to even say that?
I do think that the former president is in court with some good lawyers for a change. I think that's a very important dynamic here. I think that they are capable. They're a little bit hamstrung by some of Trump's own strategic choices. His decision to deny, the sexual liaisons with Stormy Daniels and Ms. McDougal, put them in a little bit of a bind. And I think we saw some of the contamination of that last week when Stormy Daniels was allowed to go into details that she probably shouldn't have been allowed to go into, but was only allowed to go into in large part because he denied that it ever happened, and that makes detail relevant. But I do think his current lawyers are good, and I think they'll do an effective job with Michael Cohen.
Well, Trump is now bringing lawmakers and donors to court with him. You've seen Senators J.D. Vance, Rick Scott, both coming with Trump on different days, speaking on his behalf. What's the strategy here, Ty? Is this how he sort of avoids gag order violations?
A little bit. It's also, I think, it just makes him feel good. I think he was a little lonely. His son Eric has been sort of the only cheerleader there on a regular basis. I think he feels good about having other people there. I can assure you there isn't a single juror that recognizes Tommy Tuberville or J.D. Vance. So I'm not sure how much they actually add, but I know it makes the former president feel better that he has some fans in the gallery. I think that's likely why they're there. And I also think they're there for their own individual purposes to buck up their political standing, which they have made dependent on the president's support.
Right. And probably even vying for the vice presidential position if indeed he becomes president. J.D. Vance has definitely said he wouldn't turn that down. Let me ask you, you and I both know that Trump and Cohen were so tight for so many years, even before Trump became president. I mean, I had to go through Michael Cohen and run a graph for any interview request I had prior to him becoming president. You were on the inside of Trump world when he was president. What do you think really happened with Trump and Cohen? And why did Trump want Cohen out of his inner circle after so many years of working together?
That's an excellent question. I don't really have a specialized insight necessarily into that. I do know from my own experience, I never met a single person in Trump world who had a kind thing to say about Michael Cohen. I never met anybody who didn't think he was smarmy and untrustworthy. So I think that he probably heard from a lot of different voices that he needed to distance himself from that guy, and ultimately he did. On the other hand, as Jeremy pointed out just moments ago about the trial, the issue for the prosecutors is they know that Cohen, has zero credibility as a human being. But they're hoping that, through the records, the surreptitiously, unprofessionally, unethically taped conversation that Cohen did with his own client and some of the emails and telephone records, that they can, at least put him at the right place at the right time and establish that there are certain facts that if they don't show that Cohen robbed the bank, they at least show he was in the bank. And they're hoping, I think, that will get him to the finish line, because still, much of this case will end up resting on Cohen's word, and I think that's a challenge for the prosecution. I don't think it'll be a real high bar for this jury. I think this jury will convict him. I do think the appellate courts are going to have difficulty with that, as they will with the underlying theory of the case and its efforts to tie to some as yet undetailed federal crime. But I do think a lot of this is Cohen's word, and I think that's a dangerous foundation for any case.
Well, I'm sure in your time as an attorney that you dealt with witnesses who didn't have pristine reputations. So, how would you, as a lawyer, actually approach a witness like Michael Cohen, who's essential to this case, as you just pointed out, but is so prone to self-sabotage?
Yeah, it's very difficult. I think so far, I'm not sure the prosecution has done a good enough job yet of creating some distance between their warm embrace of Cohen and the man himself. I think they've been a little um, doting on him so far, based on what I read. I'm not in the courtroom, as Jeremy said, but the way it reads is, they don't seem to be setting up the possibility that it's just his word and then coming over the top with, but here's some corroboration. They're just sort of letting him go on and set the stage with his narrative. I think that's they're going to need to create a little more distance and show the jury that they too are skeptical a little bit of Cohen and only relying on circumstances where he actually can be corroborated. But yes, I mean, I put on murderers, I put on drug dealers, kidnappers, and in criminal matters, usually you end up having to rely on criminal witnesses, and Cohen certainly is that.
So, you know Trump's temperament. You know how he can get upset very quickly. Of all the witnesses in this trial, Cohen is probably the one who Trump can't stand the most. Cohen went from problem solver to problem creator for the former president. Do you think Cohen could be the one witness that just gets under his skin and causes Trump to have an outburst? Because, as you know, Trump's been playing it pretty cool in that courtroom.
So I don't think so. But here's the reason, which is Cohen's been saying some version, and not necessarily an identical version of these facts for 3 years now, if not longer. So I think Trump's heard it before. He's a little bit inoculated to it. He knows what's coming. I do think Cohen has embellished a couple of times based on what I've read today on things that he had talked about before without adding certain facts. For example, the fact today that Trump certainly wasn't thinking about Melania. Well, he doesn't know that. I mean, he's qualified to testify that Trump didn't mention Melania, but he's not qualified to testify that what Trump was thinking. And I was a little surprised that that wasn't more fiercely objected to. But Trump, Cohen is getting some shots in. I'm not sure that actually adds to his credibility. But I do think Trump is, as I said, a little bit inoculated to this because he's heard it before. He knew it was coming. So it's not really a surprise. And I think he is just going to grin and bear it.
Interesting, because just as we've been talking about this, got a little color from the courtroom from one of my producers here that apparently Trump's eyes are closed and he's sort of clenching his face. So something's going on that's getting him riled up right now. This is also a complicated trial because the falsification of documents is a crime, yes, but what does the DA have to prove to make it a felony? Is that it was, and that it was done to cover things up, cover up another crime? It hasn't been really clear on what that crime allegedly is. What do you think it is?
So, I'm as much in the dark as anybody else. I think what they seem to be trying to prove is that it was tied to, an attempt to cover up a false campaign contribution or an unlawful campaign contribution. But I do think that's one of the problems with this statute, and certainly the way that this case, which is a first of its kind and stands on its own case, was constructed from the outset. There's no real doubt that in my view that the payments were misrepresented on the books. Yes, they went to a lawyer. Yes, they went there as legal fees, but they technically really weren't legal fees. Obviously, they were repayments of the hush money and the related tax consequences. So I think on those counts, lesser included counts of the falsification, which are misdemeanors and really are associated with virtually no penalty, never would have been brought against anybody other than Trump. There's no question that those counts have been proven in spades. But Whether they can be tied to the campaign, unlawful campaign contribution, that remains to be clear, and it's not quite clear how the judge will charge the jury on that. I think that'll be a consequential thing, and I know it'll be something that the Court of Appeals will look very closely at.
Let's keep talking. Ty Cobb, love having you here.
Nice to be with you, Kara. Take care.